Good morning, everybody. I'm Tom. I'm part of Think Trees. John, are you over? You're over there? I promised I wouldn't say anything. John didn't want a whole lot talk. He didn't want you to know he's a chief mystic mainspring from South Dakota State University and the forestry department and all of that. So, and in his honor, I just thought I'd say, Dr. John Ball is in the house.
Whoa. All right. Well, let me grab the clicker here. It's got to be. Oh, yeah, here it is. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. You're having a much better morning than my students. Thanks to modern technology, right now, my arboriculture class is taking their first exam. Started at 9 a.m. They'll have until 9:50, and we'll see how well they do. Some of them will be able to do it really good. They like to read a lot. Some of them are just kind of like they like to do the work, but they really don't like to read. But I got a plan for them. For the advanced EMT class, you have to do 10 live sticks. In other words, you have to put the needle in and start the IV. And I'm always looking for people to volunteer to do that for the nursing students. And so I'll get arboriculture students go, Dr. Ball, is there any way I can get bonus points? Oh, yeah, here's what's coming. So we'll see how many takers I'm going to get after this morning. All right, well, we're not talking about people today, not in the sense of what happens to them. That was yesterday. But I do want to interject one more comment. And the value of yesterday talking about changes of the Z is, first of all, remember, I am the messenger. I'm not the message. I'm telling you what is going into it. And if anyone disagrees with what I said by that, not that it's in the Z, but they don't want that in the Z. Entirely different thing. Okay. You've got till March 24th to tell the Z committee that. That's value of giving this talk yesterday. If you go to the ISA website, go to the Z, you can read the draft version of the Z. They'll have a comment sheet. And if you fill that out, like the gentleman over there that I had the discussion with afterwards, you know what, I like it that you have it both times, that you have two escape routes. Perfect. Write that in there and submit it. Because according to ANSI, we have to read every comment. In other words, there's a person who's going to put all the comments down there, lump them together. We have to read them. We have to debate them. We have to answer you. And this is the second draft, the final draft. The first draft, things changed. Remember what I mentioned? It was going to be three-way communication. People said they wanted two-way communication. So this is your opportunity, people, because once that door closes, it's 5 years till the next one. And if you say, I couldn't find it, email me or email someone else and we'll have you find it. But really, send in comments. That makes a far better Z, a Z that you say, this is worth following, as opposed to one you disagree with. And we're not going to have one that everybody agrees on everything, but at least you'll know the rules. All right. So with that, we'll continue on, and we need to think in tree time, which is completely different than the time scale we use. And I'm using this as an example. Look at that. Now, that's all concolor firs. A nice row of concolor firs, but some of them don't look very nice. In fact, they were losing them. And as the forest health specialist for the state, one of my jobs is to drive the whole state every week, seriously. So I'm about 500 miles from me, so I drive out there and look at the trees and go, yeah, they don't look very good. And of course, here's the question. What's wrong with my trees? What should we spray? Because you know that every problem has a chemical solution. And I go, well, let me look at those. And look at how much dieback some of them had. And here's a quote out of a great arboriculture book, 1664. There are those who by digging a little around the roots will pronounce shrewdly concerning the state tree, and if they find impairs at the top, be sure the cause lies deep. Huh! I'm not going to look at the needles. Because somebody did and said, you know what, this is rhizosphere needle blight. No. All right. Let's get out a shovel and start digging. Ooh, look at that confined root system. Oh my gosh, going around and around and around. You know why? Because they'd all been in a planter. The planter was covered over. It was actually stone that was mortared. It was a planter, a little open at the bottom, but that was it. That was the whole thing. And the roots were going around and around and around. Huh. But here's the better question. How did it get that big to begin with? You know, okay, now I understand the situation. The soil had kind of covered over the edges. Nobody even knew there were planters there anymore. It was a city park. And I found an old guy who had retired, but had worked on the crew. How to get that big? Irrigation and fertilizing. Now, I would think the fertilizing may not have done anything, but watering did. And guess what? 8 years ago, they had done that for 12 years. And then 8 years ago, they quit because the crews changed. They didn't know why they were doing that. But what they were doing was they literally were watering those trees every week. And then 8 years ago, they stopped because they could no longer see it. The crews had changed so much. So nobody knew that they were in planters. And so what happened? The trees had to die back. And I love this quote. Trees die when they cannot acquire or mobilize sufficient resources to heal injury or otherwise sustain life. Trees have they have many really cool strategies. And one of them is, I'll make myself smaller. All right. They didn't just flat out die. And I'm not saying making myself smaller is a good plan. But what it is, I don't have the resources to be this big anymore. I'm going to shrink, which is what they did. And if you take a look at a tree and how they utilize energy, it's kind of interesting. I'm going to use my energy to make new parts. Makes sense. I got to make more foliage up there to manufacture food. I've got to make new roots to go out there and gather more resources. And you know what? If I've got extra, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to store some. Trees are pretty good at that. Let's put a rainy day fund in there. Let's get some reserves. If I have a little bit more, well, I can increase diameter growth a little bit. And if I have even more, let's put them in defenses. All right, so trees follow a hierarchy. Make parts, support the parts, new shoots in that, store a little, diameter growth, and then finally defense. Now that does change, it's not static. For example, once reproduction begins, guess what? That takes over. It gets all the resources it wants. I spent a lot of my time working on bronze birch borer. And one of the things that I always tell my students about is back in the 40s, there was this huge bloom of birch trees in Canada. I mean, it just seemed like every one of them was hanging like this. They had all that. They were producing seed like no tomorrow. Trees were bending. They exhausted all their reserves, no defenses. Bronze birch borer came in and killed them. And as I tell my students, they died of too much sex. There's a message there. But with defenses, that can also reduce reserves. You know what? I'm going to tap into my rainy day fund and I'm going to defend myself. And trees have a very active defense system, quite different than what we thought when I was going to college. And we thought the only defense was spraying. But trees can defend themselves, but they can't do it all at once. Very complicated chart here, but there's only two things you need to know out of this chart. If I'm growing, I'm not defending. I'm not putting a reserve fund in. All right. So trees they do a little bit of everything, but they can't do a lot at once. I can grow, I can store, I can defend. And that changes how we look at things. You know, back in the old days, when we thought about defenses and such, we would look and say, oh, look, that tree's growing a lot more than that tree. It must be healthier. Not necessarily. It's just growing a lot. We can force that, can't we? Fertilizing. In the old days, 1970, oh yeah, fertilize trees because you could get them to really grow. That didn't mean they were putting defenses on. That didn't mean they were storing. They were living on the edge, essentially, with abundant resources. And if anyone stopped, what happened? They're going to die back. They can't defend themselves. What's a better measure? Diameter growth. If you're putting on good diameter growth, you probably have pretty good storage. And so looking at shoot growth in itself doesn't tell you a lot. I'm not saying it's not a value, but this old idea of fertilize everything, water everything, get this luxurious growth, and you've got a great tree is wrong. In fact, one area that this is changing in is in nurseries. What's the problem we have with nurseries? And I mean a challenge, sorry, not a problem. Is we want to grow trees and we want to get them bigger. Because why? That's how we sell them. We sell them by caliber. We sell them by height. Faster I can get it to that size, the better. So what are we going to give them? Luxurious amounts of water and elements. We're going to get them to grow. And they're living on the edge there. They're a happy tree in a happy pot along with a lot of other trees. And then someone buys you and takes you home and sticks you in dirt, not soil, and doesn't water you, doesn't add any elements. You have no reserves. You die. So you know what some nurseries are doing? Tough love. Several years before they sell them, they start cutting them off. We're not going to water you as much. We're not going to increase those elements. What we're going to try to do is build your reserves, build your defenses. Problem with doing that, guess what? It takes longer to grow a tree to a certain caliper and height. But we got to remember, too often we take trees out that have been growing in perfect conditions, put them out in an environment where you know people essentially abuse them. I think we ought to do something they do with pet adoptions now. If you come into Brookings, South Dakota, and you say you want to adopt a cat, well, first of all, there must be something wrong with you. But nevertheless, you want to adopt a cat, that they're going to make you fill out a little thing. We're not just going to give you a cat. You got to fill this out. How do we know you're going to probably care it? Imagine that in a garden center. Well, I'm going to buy this tree. I don't know yet, sir. We got a little quiz for you. Oh, I failed. I can't buy a tree. Well, we'd have a lot better trees out there. But instead, we get this. All right, the trees are spiraling out there. Decreased photosynthesis, fewer reserves, less roots, smaller, that spiral, and they finally die. And this is when they call us. Well, what do I spray? Well, did you plant it? Yes, spray yourself. You won't do it again. But take a look at the hierarchy here, how this goes. You got a healthy tree, then something changes, then something changes. And you see on the time scale, it takes a while to kill a tree. So you got a healthy tree there and you get a drought. Remember Philip's conversation yesterday with you? What did he say the most of the samples were? Abiotic, right? Abiotic's the first trigger there, the first key. In this case, we got a healthy bur oak up where I'm at. We go through drought. What that does, alters the trees. Reserves are dropping because it had to depend on. Then what happens? We get defoliation. All right, basswood leaf miner will attack them. You know what happens then? Our storage reserves are down. We test them with iodine, potassium iodine. And you could see that top picture, boy, you've got a lot of starch. Lower picture, no. Now your defenses are down. Then defenses are down, we get secondary pests. Abiotic stressors predispose trees, these secondary pathogens. He mentioned that yesterday. This afternoon, I think you're going to probably hear the same thing about insects. A lot of our insects, a lot of our diseases are opportunistic. They depend on a host that is vulnerable. That means a host whose defenses are down. And then that finally kills the tree. And you know what people focus on? Oh, let's spray for two-line chestnut borer. That was at the end of this. The problem started earlier. And no, I can't resurrect the dead. But if we get it when it's being attacked, that already tells you that tree's in trouble. Sure, we may need to treat the two-line chestnut borer, but we got to start treating everything else. And when people say, well, you know what? I know it's been died, I say, wait a minute. It's taken 15 years to get in this condition. It's going to take at least 5 to get it back. There are no quick fixes. We got to work in tree time. The spiral of decline or mortality spiral, as Manning wrote a number of years ago, is almost more than 40, is you have predisposing stressors, climate and soils. You plant it in the wrong spot. It's not adapted to the soil. It's not adapted to this climate, or you planted it wrong. Because once you plant it, that's set. You can't go back. That's going to stress the tree. And then you get these inciting stressors. These are kind of acute episodes. You get a drought. You get defoliating insects. That pushes it a little bit more over the edge. Now you got a tree whose defenses are down. It's vulnerable. Now what happens? Cankers. Remember, he mentioned that yesterday. We get decay, we get borers. These are all secondary factors. They're telling you the tree is in trouble. They're finishing off. All right. By the time they're attacked here, we've got zombie trees, the walking dead. We can't just treat the last thing that attacks it. I wrote an article on that, 81. All right, on bronze birch borer. And again, the same thing here. We get this, the insects start attacking it, and then we get the bronze birch coming in and finishing off. And if all you did was treat the borer, yeah, just are correcting symptoms. You got to improve the health of that tree again. That's a real complicated part. I don't expect you to read the whole thing, but the only reason I put that up there is to let you know it's complicated. It's really complicated, but I like what Linda said yesterday. Remember she mentioned sprouting, response to stress? Oh yeah, tree knows it's in trouble. It's got to get some new canopy up there. All right, why? Because it's got to feed the roots. And when I went through it, interesting enough, when I categorized decline in birch, in the beginning of the decline, there were no bronze birch borers. In other words, the decline started and then the bronze birch borer came in. So this is a take-home message today, and remember it this afternoon when you hear the talk on insects. If it's a secondary pest, manage the tree in the site. Now, I'm not saying forget about the insect. It's obviously contributed. But when the afternoon, when they talk about secondary pests, or remember back to yesterday when Philip talked about this as well, that you got to manage the host as well, because the host defenses are down. And if the defenses are good, it can usually hold off secondary pests. That's why I call them secondary. Okay. If it's a primary pest, manage the pest. Because a primary pest does not care how healthy that tree is. It'll attack and kill it. So you need to know what you're looking at. So like yesterday when he talked about primary and secondary, or this afternoon when they talk about primary and secondary, that's important. Tells you how you're managing. And I'll drive that home a little bit more. Bronze birch borer secondary. It finishes off the dying. The tree's already stressed, beginning to die. Bronze birch borer picks up on that. This is a volatile that they can key in on, comes in, kills the tree. And if all we did was focus on that insect, we're not taking care of the problem. But in my article there, I mentioned, hey, if we're talking about Asian birch, that strategy doesn't follow. And it doesn't. Bronze birch borer is a primary pest for Asian and European birches. Why? They don't have any defenses against it. Why? Because they don't have bronze birch borer in Europe and Asia, and you don't build defenses for things you've never seen before. And you can't suddenly come up with a new defense when you find it. So the management for bronze birch borer for our native trees are manage the site, improve the health of the tree. The management for European and Asian is a chainsaw, cut them down, because they have no defenses. Or if you say, no, I really want to keep that tree, guess what you're doing? You're treating for bronze birch borer. It does not matter how healthy you keep the tree. You're just making it bigger, tastier. And so we have problems with that. All the Asian ones, they have no defenses. Well, emerald ash borer is a primary pest in the United States. All right, why? Because it's native to Asia. Our native ash have no defenses against it. I get people still saying, you know what? If we water our ash better, or if we fertilize them more, that'll hold off this insect. Not a chance. You're just making them bigger and tastier. All right, you're saying, here, I'm bigger. Go for me. All right, because our trees really don't have defenses. They've never been exposed to before, and they can't build defenses that quickly. There I am in China, wandering through their woods, which is pretty extensive, lots of woods. And if I find their Asian ash, guess what? Emerald ash borer secondary pest then. Why? Because they've always been together. With these trees have drought, yes, their defenses are down. Emerald ash borer will come and finish them off. The problem is when it showed up in this country, it recognized all our ash as ash trees. But our ash trees didn't have any defenses because the defenses are expensive. Now, if I want to find emerald ash borer killing trees in China, I drive into Xinjiang and look at their tree planting projects. Look at that. Globally, we plant things wrong. You bet they're dying there. Nobody here's surprised at that. But yeah, you come back to this country and there's whole streets of it. You know, and just to show you the pattern, it starts like this. And what's that emerald ash borer do? Severs that connection, the phloem between the leaves and the roots. The tree slowly starves to death. You know what's kind of interesting about it? Towards the end, what's it do? It produces all these water sprouts. Why? It's trying to recapture foliage mass to keep the roots alive. But here's the interesting thing. The trees decline, and die. And why do they kind of suddenly die? All the reserves are exhausted in the root systems because they can live off those for a while. Then the tree goes. And why is that a problem? If you're ever felling one of these trees, you're felling a tree that essentially the roots are gone. And I've had it where the entire tree collapses as you're felling it. You want to see expense? Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where we have it. I've had people that have had good quotes, $25,000 to remove a tree. Because it's standing dead in a backyard, target-rich environment. And you know what? You're taking quite a risk to do the work, and you ought to be paid for that. And so prices skyrocket, legitimately. And so how do you keep ash alive? You inject them. You treat them. Companies out here have products that'll do it. And you have to do that every 2 years because why? Emerald ash borer will kill it otherwise. Doesn't matter how healthy you keep it. So we need to think in tree time. Trees are like ships. Long time to change a course. And we fail to make the connection between the stress and the response. You know, look at our stresses. And I'm going to just go over some real common ones. Construction, planting, and pruning. Big things we do. Big things you all have to look at. And the response, secondary pests, decline, and death. All right, but we want to blame insects. We want to blame a disease. I'm going to start with construction. I hate construction. You know why I hate construction is the trees are alive the day you're done with construction. And so the architects and the engineers say, trees are still fine. No, they're going to die in 3, 4, 5, 10 years. Here's one. I got called to this property. Why? Because it borders state property. And their trees were dying, and they swore the insects were crawling from our state property over to their trees and killing their trees, and then crawling back. I kid you not. And I go, you know what? I don't think so. But I looked at that tree. Does anyone notice anything unusual about that tree? That's a pretty large branch down there, isn't it? And I looked at that and I go, you changed the grade here at all when you put your house up? Oh, well, little. What's a little? 15 feet. They backfilled every tree 15 feet. The trees were alive when they finished. Tree time says, give me 5 or 6 years, I'm going to die on you. Oh, one of my other favorites. This is the campus of South Dakota State University. See that building behind there? This gets worse. Linda, you'll love this. That's our horticulture building. And so what did they do? Well, you know what? That was a fairly small ash at that point, but they backfilled them because engineers always know more than we do. Backfilled it 2 feet. And I look at this tree, and I take it to my students. Look at this tree. What's wrong with this tree? That's going straight in the ground. Oh, yeah. But it looked okay. It looked okay. It looked okay. It looked okay. One morning, I pulled in the parking lot, and hallelujah, it was over on its side. No major storm, no wind. Oh my gosh, I'm a happy man. Look at that tree. It fell over finally after 25 years. And look at the canopy. It still looks good, doesn't it? That's all you see. Tree's fine, tree's fine, tree's fine. Look at the bark. I mean, we're talking compacted soil. Engineers' idea of compacting and ours are two different things. All right. And that soil was tight, but look at the bark on that. It was actually compressed bark from that depth all the way down, and the roots had rotted out. And it took it 25 years to kill that tree. What killed it? Construction. But you all know that as a problem because so often the minute the construction's done, all the trees look fine. They can look fine 5 years later. We got to think in tree time. What's killing the trees? Oh, another one from my campus. They wanted to keep this Colorado spruce and it looked better. But Colorado spruce and cats to me are in the same category. I see no value to either. All right. But they wanted to keep it. All right, fine. They did. And they had to change the grade. So you see what they did? They did a tree well. Now, this is 2 years after they did it. And you already see the decline up there? All right. Well, you know, tree wells. Tree wells are death pits. All right. People, oh, we'll do a tree well and that'll save the tree. Sure, it'll do it. It'll be alive when you finish, but it's going to die. So here's the same tree 2 years later, 4 years after construction. Now I'm cutting it down in a tree pit. All right. So again, did it help the tree? No. And I wish we'd get away from doing these sort of things. One last one. By the way, South Dakotans are gophers. We always like to build things with mounds. All right. So I get called up to Aberdeen, South Dakota, couple-hour drive. People call me because, you know, got a beautiful house, had it there for a bit, about 2 years, I think it was. I'm still working on it. All right. But they called me because the trees were starting to decline. Well, they had these little cones around them, but they called me because the tops were dying. And guess what I found? I found poplar borer. Well, there's a surprise. Poplar borer attacks stressed trees. What stressed the trees? Let's look at some of their little edging here. Oh, wait a minute. It goes down 14 feet. 14 feet. When I drove up, I thought, well, those are kind of cute rings around your trees. 14 feet. And you all know the question. Well, what can I do? Nothing. Don't do this anymore. All right. Cut them off, backfill. You're done. You know, but another one, not on my campus, thank goodness. But I hate seeing this. New home construction. Actually, they moved the home and put it up, but here's the site. They like to keep all those spruces, but they're just destroying everything within 10 feet of it and compacted it. So I took a picture of this last week, and this is 2 years later. And there it is. They're down to one tree, and it doesn't look good either. That's raising grades. What about lowering grades? Look at this one. That's year one, I'll call it. They lowered the grade around these cottonwoods 4 feet. 4 feet. Reason I got called is landscaping company were putting up the blocks, got nervous because the trees were creaking. So I met out there with the architect, plan community. And I looked at those and I said, you got to be kidding me. You guys did that? And then he said, and Linda will love this, with that voice, you just want to take the head and shove it into the wall. Well, Dr. Ball, you should know roots go down as far as a tree is tall. And I go, are you a moron? They go out as far as a tree is tall. You just cut them off. Now, to his credit, because we've all had misstatements, he owed it. Okay, all right, yep, you showed me. My bad. Contacted the landowner, said, look, we made a big mistake here. We'll remove the trees. We'll plant new ones. I mean, that's a good person, right? We all make mistakes. So I like that guy. Well, the homeowner said, no, they're on my property now. Those are 1,000-year-old cottonwoods. Nah, they're actually about 80. You're not cutting them down. So, okay, there's not cutting them down. So I got a picture of it. That's year one. And I stood there with the homeowner and I said, look, can I come out here and take a picture every year? Till they fall over and crush your house. He said, sure, we'll meet every year. So the yellow line shows, the yellow arrow shows the position before they started. You can see they haven't finished filling around there. That's year one. There's year two. The arrow shows the previous year. There's year three. Now, by the way, smartest grove of cottonwood you've ever seen. Why? They're leaning over the house. Okay. There's year four, and I'm showing everyone, and even the blocks are beginning to buckle. When I went back the next year, he'd finally taken them down. I didn't get a picture of a crushed house, and I'm happy with that. But notice how many years. They didn't fall over the next day. That's our problem. Thinking tree time. Linda, last one on my campus. Now, by the way, the university does crazy things when I'm gone because they know I'll be upset. So I left town in Black Hills for a couple of days, came back, go, what the? Every tree along the street here, they had trenched. They had trenched 10 feet deep on two sides of each tree. I know, it's engineers. 2 feet from them. 10 feet down on two sides, the sidewalk side. Now, by the way, the side facing here is the road, so you don't have a lot of roots. These are boulevard trees. That's the way they looked. And I ran over to the vice president and said, what are you doing? Oh, John, calm down. We knew you'd be upset. And I go, well, yeah, you're killing trees. No, we're not. The city did this on some trees last year, and the trees are fine. Oh, yeah, you see where this is going. And I go, you know what? I'm going to stand there and get a picture every year. When they die, they died of Dr. Rieger disease. That's the administrator. All right, so there's your one. There's your two. Now, you notice the difference, right? But if you were just driving down the street, it might not catch your eye. Year three would catch your eye. Yeah. Now, here's what I like. Year four, I'm finishing cutting them down with my inmate crew. And guess what? People are driving by screaming at us saying, you tree killers, you. Nobody screams at the engineers. You know, we're out there. We're morticians. We prepare the dead for burial. All right. And that was my job here. All right, next issue we have. What about training our trees? I love Brian's discussion yesterday. I mean, it was fantastic. And he talked about the value of training. And so I just want to reinforce a couple of things, not really add much to it because it was a superb job. But, you know, one of the things I got asked or mentioned one time by a customer when I was working out east says, why do I have to pay you to train my trees? Nobody trains them in the forest. I said, you're absolutely wrong. They're trained by the surrounding trees. You ever go into a forest and look at trees? What do they look like? They look like power poles. They're kind of forcing that growth. That's the growth they've had for a long, long, long time. That's what they're designed for. But urban trees suffer from an excess of light. In a forest, they've never had light from the side, have they? They've always had light from above. Do you realize by taking trees and putting them in urban forests, And Linda mentioned this yesterday. There's no tree really native to the urban forest. And look at their urban environment there. They can spread out. They get lazy. Well, they develop a structure that they're not designed to support. Now, that doesn't mean we want to turn urban trees into power poles. They're not going to survive. But it does mean we need to do some training because we all like that lollipop shape. And I'll admit that can be attractive. But that means we've got to train them. All right? We just can't leave them this way. You train your puppy, train your trees. Now, you know what? One of the problems I've got with that bill that they talked about, which is great, they're dumping a lot of money into urban forestry. My prediction is a lot of that will be wasted. What we'll be looking at in 10 years is dead trees or trees so misshapen you'll just drive over them and call it a mercy killing. All right? If we really want to do it right, and again, that's a general statement. It's not against any particular program or that, but I hope we spend that money well. And we get the trees off to a good start rather than just figure we got them in the ground. Because you know what, young trees, and what did he say yesterday? Young trees is when you do most of your training, kind of like your kids. All right? Prune small trees more, large trees less. When they're young, they have a surplus. Linda mentioned that. Look at how much roots I could take off and the tree will come back. On a young tree, can't do that on an old tree. All right? Old trees, income and expenses are about the same. They're manufacturing about as much food as they utilize. You don't want to adjust that much. So with your trees, like your kids, train them when they're young. You didn't let your kids run wild in the street, did you, huh? Until they turn 18 and then you turn them to college. Well, some of you did. I get them. They're untrainable at that age. All right? There's nothing I can do. All right? So train them. And then you can train a young tree to do just about anything. Those are completely healthy trees. They've been trained to do that. They don't know anything else. But only if you know what you're doing. Oh, I love this picture. Those are European beech trees at the Edinburgh Royal Botanical Gardens. There's a hedge there made out of beech trees. Look at that, 1906, 158 over 165 feet. It's like a wall. They're perfectly healthy. They did not wait until they're big and buzz them. That was training, continual. They're perfectly healthy trees as long as they continue this training. Look at that tree. I've been training that tree. That's at our church. And those are my daughters when they were much younger. I trained them too. Hopefully, Doreen and I did a good job. All right. They seem to become good adults, but you got to train them. And if you train them right, that's what an accolade elm looks like when it's mature. We're not there yet in the parking lot. Daughters are, but we're not there with the tree yet. If you don't train them, this is what they look like. They go sideways. You know, one of the things I hate is volunteer tree trimmers. You ever get a city to do that? Well, we'll just have volunteers go out and train the trees. Sure, let's have them do open heart surgery too, because it's all about the same. Now, by the way, I'm not saying not having master gardeners do it. That's trained people do it. But I hate it when they say, we'll just get people to come out on a weekend and trim trees. Oh my gosh, it's a disaster. So what's training? Well, it's getting that central leader and suppressing the competing ones. So there's the tree I was working on, and boy, okay, I'm going to clean some of those branches off. I'm going to get good separation there while the branches are small and they don't have heartwood in them, as he mentioned yesterday. And I'm going to keep working on that. I'm going to do a little bit every year, and you can see even there, the wounds have already enclosed. I've got a nice tree started, but I do it every year. It's right outside my office, so it's kind of my coffee break. All right? It's a process, and I'm not done with it yet. Watch how much you take off. There's Ed Gilman. Brian mentioned his name a lot yesterday. He's probably been here. He's just a master at pruning. Him and I were doing a workshop in Southfield, and he did an excellent job, but there's a but. So here he is, and he's going to train that tree. You can see him starting. He's making the cuts. He's cutting, he's cutting, he's cutting, and he's done. Did that tree in an hour. He did all the training in an hour. Now, you know why he did that, of course. It was for a demonstration. He doesn't have everybody, let's come here and watch me do a little bit every year for 5 or 10 years. It's, I've got to do it all now. So there it is. It's done. Well, interesting enough, that same business campus, a year later, I was at giving another talk, I got to go out and look at that tree. Oh my gosh. It was horrible. They all were. But Brian mentioned this yesterday. Heading guns aren't the problem, it's the follow-up. Nobody ever come back to the tree. Okay, it was just left there. The dose was too high, but he had to do that because how could he show it? But nobody came back. What did Brian say? Small pruning doses over time is the key. Cannot overemphasize that. Had that been done a little bit every year, we would not have this. So here's the important point I want you to remember when you're out there training your young trees. If the tree produces water sprouts, it's telling you something. Okay, it's telling you it took too much off. Dial it back a little bit. All right, you're going to do this every year, every other year for the first 10 years of the tree's life. Don't let it get overdone. And if it starts sprouting, say, okay, we got to dial this back a little bit. Oh, look at this tree. This tree's telling you a lot. All right, it's almost dead. That is the fall and the spring the next year of a big sugar maple when they cut it back that heavy. We do this to trees. I love this quote. If I were a tree, I would have no reason to love a human. I mean, oh my gosh. Oh, look at this. Oh, back it up. Look at pruning bigger trees. Anyone here own a dendroscope? You can't buy them out of the catalogs anymore. If you were a forester years ago, you would have a dendroscope. It'd be clipped right to you. And you go, what the heck do I use a dendroscope for? You stand out there, look at your tree, you have your climbers cut everything off outside of that. Yeah, we used to do that. That's insane. But that's how we get trees to look like this. You know, well, we got to cut them all back like this. We'll retrench them. Shigo said it best, we can't make a tree healthier by making it smaller. You know, we got to watch what we're doing on mature trees. Oh, okay. If you had some breakfast, you might lose it. Just warning you on this one. Look at that. 250-year-old drop dead gorgeous bur oak, but sick, deprived people lived in that house. They said that tree's got to be pruned. The grass isn't growing well. Who cares? It's grass. Not going to do it. Well, they found a company to do it. Okay, just, you might want to look away. Got a call and they said, hey, they found a company to do it. Woof. Oh, I told you. Yep. I mean, yeah. I'll bet you can tell just how high their bucket truck would reach. Now, by the way, even the homeowner was a little horrified by this, you think. Do you see what the company did to save the trees? Or save this tree? Oh, come on, this is great. You see these bright green dots on 2-foot patterns? Yeah, deep root fertilizing, because that'll save a tree. Oh yeah, that's exactly what it needs. An overabundance of elements. Yeah, those two ought to help the tree. So, well, we did get to work on the tree. It was called the removal in year 4. They killed a 250-year-old tree in 4 years by that much work. Now, that was a lot quicker than I typically expect. And by the way, if you're a turf person, the grass is doing great. But I love this quote out of 1618 here, New Orchard and Garden. What a hindrance shall be, not only to the owner, but to the common good, the unspeakable benefits of many hundreds of years should be lost by the audacious attempts of an unskilled arborist. That's the oldest reference I can find to the word arborist. You know what he was complaining about? These group of people that walked from village to village with their pruning hooks, destroying trees. He said, we've got to stop this. 400 years ago. Now, had we gone with his punishment, we could have. In that book, his penalty for topping, forfeit his hand, he who beheads a tree. Whoa! Yeah, we're in. You know what? The beauty of that is you could only top a tree twice. Yeah, let's get real on this stuff. All right, planning. We'll finish up with that. I've got about 25 minutes. And we had a great talk on that. But I love this quote, Martin Luther. Even if I knew the world would end tomorrow, I would still plant a tree. Oh, I would too. You know why? because it's probably ain't going to live any longer than that anyway, you know, because we make a lot of mistakes there. Oh, all right, back to this. Fed spread $1 billion for trees planted among U.S. cities to reduce extreme heat and benefit health. One of their money giveaways here. Again, I'm very happy they're focusing on urban forestry. But here's my issue. Number of trees planted is not as more important as number of trees that are alive. Could we measure success 10 years from now, not what we got into the ground or who did it? Because when I look at these, mortality is incredible. You all know that. And so I don't care how many you plant. I'd rather have you plant a third of what you do and have them all live. All right, that's what we need. You know what? We try to get our train groups out there. There's some of my students on a perfect day for tree planting, not so much for them, but bare root planting, which is I love to do because it saves expenses and we don't have less problems with the roots. But I like this out of 2 journals. For about every 100 planted trees, about 20 to 40 are dead by year 5. Look at that. Think how many you plant. You better plant a couple of trees for every one you expect to live, or do a better job of planting. I'd like to see fewer trees that go in the ground and more resources spent on those trees. Let's get away from the numbers game. Once again, you can do everything wrong. Tree will live. My campus again, Linda. South Dakota State University, December 2003. Built a new art museum, put a nice addition on it, $14 million. I know, I'm in charge of landscaping too. All right, so they said, John, you got to develop a landscape plan. So I did. When they got it done, guess what? They ran out of money. They go, well, John, can you go to the nurseries and have them donate plants? I used to manage nurseries. I got tired of people coming to me. Would you donate plants? I always like this. Would you donate plants? It'll be good for you. I said, what? That I give away plants? I don't know. That's not why I'm in business. Now, again, as nurseries, we would always, to good causes, donate. That's why I always tell people, buy locally, because those are the ones you're going to go to. Right? But I said, I'm not going to the nurseries. We already asked them 2 years ago for another building. And I said, besides that, tell me who donated the wiring, the glass, the metal. Oh, you paid for all that. So I said, I'm not putting anything in. So I didn't put anything in. First week of December, they're going to have their big opening. They look at that and go, there's no plants out there. We can see the loading dock. So I'm out there with 2 vice presidents. They always come in pairs. You got to landscape this, John. Now, yes. Can't get the plant materials. Nurseries are shut down. Well, we got a tree spade. Not going to do that. All right, ground's pretty hard. He says, well, you got to do something. I said, well, tell you what. Why don't I drive around campus, cut trees down, auger holes in the ground, and stick them in? And they go, you can do that? So sure. I drove around campus, cut trees down. All right, now she looks horrified. There goes my evaluation. John, leave. Give me a little credit, ma'am. I chose trees that were in footprints of buildings. In other words, they were going to come down anyway to put a new dorm up or, heaven forbid, a parking lot. So it wasn't like I just drove through town, run amok, and cut down, because that would have been fun. Drive up to somebody's house. I need that oak. Grab it. But harvested the trees, augered holes in the ground, and started sticking them in. I had that whole building landscape by the end of the day. I had some faculty walk by and say, you know they're going to die. And I said, hello, they're dead. I said, the university liked the final design so much they strung Christmas lights on it. Okay, so what's the point of this? To show you that I'm capable of doing stupid things? No. The point of this is I didn't get around to taking out that landscape until after the 4th of July. Spring's pretty busy. Now, of course, the first trees in are the last trees out. So what do you think those spruce, which were the first ones in, looked like the following July? Like that. They can hang on that long. I've seen this before. Now, of course, they would have crashed very quickly by August. My point of this, that's what a 1-year guarantee is worth. I don't even need roots. So you get people saying, well, no, it can't because we planted it wrong. I don't even need roots. And I can have something hang on for almost a year. I know, it's crazy. Don't write this down and do this. Oh, by the way, why did I know it would work? There was a lawsuit. They were trying to sell it in December when I was in Minnesota. The realtor told them they needed more curb appeal. So after Christmas, they went out and got all the Christmas trees from the Christmas tree stands, augured holes in the ground, stuck them all in on this long drive, sold the house. The new homeowners called me in August because their trees were dying. And I look at them and I go, my gosh, they look so perfectly sheared. And I started digging around the base and it fell over. And I go, they stuck Christmas trees here. By the way, that's highly illegal, all right, to do that. So yeah, they got sued. But anyway, plant them right. You can't redo that. Oh my God, I hate these things. They're called pots. Now, you all remember the day with the big cans or B&B, and we've gone to containers, so I live with it. I hate them, but killer containers. Look at that. What's the way we can grow trees and shrubs? Let's put them in these little pots. And I know we do it and we're going to do it. And I've lived with it. I've adjusted. But Linda said it, they come too deep in the container. The old extension material, and she mentioned this, would always say, plant them to the same depth you bought them at. All the new stuff says, no, find the first root. That's your planting depth. My general statement to people is dig the hole about half as deep as the container. You're probably going to have it about right. All right. Oh, and here's a good one. That's too deep, isn't it? Look at this one. Okay. Now here's the interesting thing for all you nursery people. That's a 4-inch caliper tree. Whoa, see, that's the answer I wanted to hear. What? 4-inch caliper? And now, by the way, he's not the architect. He's the manager. But I had to meet the architect. I'm going, what? They're 4-inch trees? And he said, when they came in, he said, I really wanted them branched lower. Yes. Do you know how to get a tree to be branched lower? You plant it deeper. So all the trees, they put that little tube around the base of every tree. Yeah, I know. Tube around a tree, and they planted them 24 inches too deep on purpose. And I said, tell you what, you think that tube was going to help? Lie down. I'm going to give you a long straw. I'm going to backfill you for 2 feet. Suck away. But they didn't die immediately. And why am I called? Find the bug. All right, circling roots. She went over this, and I love her quote. Circling roots will fuse into a woody mass. Linda described it best. That's a discovery on 3 years after planting. Even those take time. Look at this one. I was out just working in the subdivision in Aberdeen. And of course, people see me, I'm the tree guy. Hey, would you come in my backyard? So I came in the backyard and look at the tree. That tree's been there for 15 years. And they say, it's kind of dying back. What's the problem? Well, okay, premature fall color. Look at the base. 15 years in the trees. I mean, yeah, you can cut roots out, but this tree was beyond that. Just remove the tree. Something that could have been corrected 15 years ago. Tree time. All right, I've got 15 minutes. We're going to spend that on one project. Thought you might find this interesting on tree time. Now we're in the Black Hills of South Dakota, which I get to fly over all summer. It is fun. All right, one part of the job. And it's a great place to work. I do love what I do. But in there, in Deadwood, which you probably all know because of the TV show, Kevin Costner wanted to build a resort and call it the Dunbar. For you young people, you might not even know what Dunbar was. If you saw the movie Dances with Wolves, you get the connection immediately. So they designed this beautiful resort destination. What's the problem with that picture, people? They drew in mature trees. So what do you think they wanted? Mature trees. So there's the site. All right, on top of this opened area here. It was the only vacant land in the city limits of Deadwood. So, I mean, the reason they bought this place, it was the last piece of ground. And you had to be in the city limits to have a gambling casino. And so they were going to build on a hilltop that essentially had been blown off already by somebody else. So there's the site. And we're going to make that look like a forest. because that's what they wanted, because that's what they were sold. So let's bring some tree spades out. No, it gets better. World's largest tree mover, 102 inches. Actually, it was 110 total. By the way, this is screw driven, not hydraulic, so it'll go through rock. And so brought them out, had them start moving trees. There they are. We're picking them up. We're driving them up on the site. That's the receiving hole. Yeah, I know, great soil. I'll come back to that in a minute. And sticking them in, okay? Now these trees are 60 feet tall, okay? And we're done. There they are. So the next year, as we're gonna get the project going, I got a call, it says, okay, we're bringing a different tree spade in. Well, why? I said, this one was too small. The only reason we used it was going over the logistics. How do we move trees from where we can pick them to where they're going? Do we have the road constructed right? Da, 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 da. And it was cheaper bringing this one. And he says, but they're still alive. Ah, we'll come back to these at the end. So again, for these, well, look at that. We were actually cutting roots about 4 1/4 feet away from that trunk. And by the way, for the trees that we were moving, take a look. 14 inches diameter, 60, because I've got all the trees numbered in that. Ages, we did the sizes, so we've got the whole vary. But the thing is, when you look at these from old Forest Service documentation here, 39 inches deep, 40-foot radius for mature ponderosa pine, 42 inches deep, 48-foot radius. Look how far those roots were in depth. Now, again, as was mentioned yesterday, the depth will vary based upon the site. Brian even mentioned that, on open soils will go down deeper, but nevertheless, you weren't picking up very many roots, were you, to move something like that? So let's go with a bigger tree spade. Yes, about 16 feet. All right, picks up the entire tree, has to hold it straight up, can't turn it. So that means when you pick up a 60-foot tree, you need 80-foot clearance. Every power line had to be put underground, going from where they're being picked to where they're being planted. And this takes up both lanes of road. Imagine coming down the road and seeing a tree coming at you. All right, and it makes about a 5+ soil ball. And you might go, well, that's great, John, but you're still not getting the original soil volume of 7,000. You're getting 1,000. They'll live. Did a project in Las Vegas, Desert Inn, moved all their trees from the golf course. It's not saving roots when you move big trees. It's providing with conditions to generate, not regenerate, to generate new roots very quickly. You can't save enough, all right? They're designed to do this. So when you look at a big tree like that, it's the roots that were captured in the plug, which aren't going to be that many, though there's going to be quite a few. The density's higher near the base. And it's going to be roots generated from the severed tips. And it can work. But if you ever look at a tree root, it tapers down very quickly. Starts out very large at the base, and by the time you get about 8 feet out, it is very, very small. And it's rope light all the way out 40 feet or more. It's not big. So here it is. This is one of the trees we had. 8 inches at the base, 4 inches 3 feet out, 2 inches 6 feet out, 1 inch 9 feet out. That's important. They taper down very quickly. And you can see that here in a tree that fell over because they severed the roots. This is a whole different thing. But here's the point. Remember that tree before at about a little over 4? You were cutting some pretty big roots off that thing, weren't you? When you cut big roots like that, they don't generate very many new roots because the stub's too big. You look at the pit where we grabbed them, you're cutting 3 and 4 inch diameter branches, which means you're going to get virtually none of the new roots coming out of that. And so what we're looking for is about 2 inches. If I cut a 2-inch root, if I look in the plug hole and I see I've only cut roots that are 2 inches or smaller, I'm good. Because now I've got the size of roots that's going to generate new roots relatively quickly. And this has been done by other people as well. So 2 inches, look at that. little less than an inch, I'm fine. So if I get 6 feet out from the base, so if I'm moving trees with a 16-foot diameter spade, I'm there, aren't I? I've captured a lot of smaller roots next to it, but I'm also cutting roots off where they have the ability to generate new roots fairly quickly. And that was the point. And remember, you're not moving trees, you're moving sites. Okay, that tree's been in that environment for 60 years plus. So here's where I'm picking trees from. Silt loam, 6.5 pH, low salt diet, fairly good organic matter content. Like Linda mentioned, watch that. 15 parts per million of phosphorus, 216 of potassium. That's well within the limits for the trees. That's where I was grabbing them from. That's where they were going. Remember, they bought the site this way. Clay, 7.7, salts, no organic matter, low salts, incredibly high phosphorus. And I stood there with the architect and I go, what? Don't worry, John, we've gotten the specs, 6 inches of black dirt. Great. That's veneer. It won't do it. So look at that tree. Do you know something about that tree? It's actually sticking 2 feet out of the ground. So dug the holes, put them in a good subsoil, stuck them 2 feet out, and then brought the soil from the original site in 2 lifts. The lower foot was put down, then the upper foot was put down, and it wasn't stored very long because, as Tom Perry used to say, you stockpile soil more than 6 feet tall, you will kill it. So it's essentially grab it and move it. And we did that. That added, I think, $500,000 to the project. But now you got a chance of survival, don't you? And there's our final project soils. Fairly close to what we had. All right. And if you look at others, this is Tom Perry's article back in '89, 5-inch depth soil, poor, 24, excellent. We were going for Perry's suggestions. Let's bring soil. Let's bring the soil. So there it is. You can see all the trees going in all over the place, and there's a problem. The backhoe. Okay, engineer was out there and goes, these specs are wrong. You got to have soft fill underneath these trees. I want you to excavate out deeper than the ball. Puts topsoil at the bottom there and set the tree. Yes, I know. You on heart medication too, sir? I'm sorry, we're getting you too excited here. All right. What's going to happen when we do that? Uncompacted fill at the bottom on a soil ball that weighs 46 tons. Yeah. If you stop by, you'll see the increasing leaning tower of Dunbar. We've got trees, because I caught it half a day. And I was like, oh, stop this. But here's the trees that have been leaning. They are slowly settling. Do you notice how it's dipping down? And you look at them year after year, and they're just shorter and leaning. Oh, hilarious. Yeah, we got pits now. And we use mulch. Linda's next talk's on that, so I won't add to it other than we did. It was helpful, but you know, we also had to guy these trees. They were on compression springs so that the tree would still sway in that to it. But here's one you don't often think about, but it's important, is orientation. Trees aren't stupid. They build wood where they need it. And they orientate it towards the wood towards the sway. So guess what? When you pick up a tree, you mark the paint mark and the prevailing winds, and you make sure it's in the same direction when you moved it. And if you don't, you get that. They'll snap off. Why? Because you look at them, they're elliptical. And now you move them suddenly, and they're in a direction they can't suddenly change. Again, it's tree time. Well, how'd it go to finish this up? All right, it's never built the resort. Awesome. We got trees to look at. And by the way, I should mention this. The work was done by Environmental Design out of Tombolt, Texas, and they deserve the credit for the success of all this. And it worked out well. But there's the trees, 1994, after they went in. Okay. All right. You can see the various sizes of that up there. There's the same site in 97. Same site in 2012. One of the things I was pleased with, and then here's 2022. One of the things that I said to the Cosners is said, this will become the Wizard of Oz building. So what do you mean? It'll look like it came down in a tornado nestled in a forest. And it did, except they never put the building up. There's some of the trees, 90, 95, 2017. Look at that tree, numbered because I got them all numbered. 11 inches when it was moved. Now it's 18 inches. It's recovered very nicely, but it does take a while. And we've also measured the roots, but look at the cores I've taken out of them. Look at that tree. You can see it just about stopped when we moved it. And then look at it by 2015. It is growing. And if you move small trees, 16-foot tall trees with a 16-foot spade, it didn't even know it was picked up. And you don't see any reduction in growth. Moved 210 pines between 9 and 28 inches, 94% establishment. And that's looking long-term, not the next year. But what about those original pines? Too small of a spade, right? Too large of a cut. Okay, well, there's the 6 in 95. There's the one left in 2000. One had managed to hang in that long. There it is by 2005. And there it is by 2010. You can see the others have broke off long ago. But darn if one didn't hang in that long and finally died by 2017, despite the fact it had been exceptionally abused. So my point of this discussion is thinking tree time. Don't evaluate the success of a project 1 year later. That's too soon. You got to look over years, perhaps decades, to see what you did, whether it worked. So I'll finish with this, words to live by. And I want you to think of this with all that money. There's that common phrase, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, the next best time is now. No time is good if you're not going to take care of it. And I thought this quote out of Little Prince is the best. People have forgotten this truth, the fox says, but you mustn't forget it. You become responsible forever for what you have tamed. Think of that. I dragged trees out of a forest and stuck them in a completely altered environment. We're responsible forever. You don't just move them. Okay? So with that, I'll show you this last tree here, and then we're done. One nice thing about being old is you can go back and look at trees you planted. There's a tree I planted in 74, and I've kind of tracked it. I haven't been back to visit the tree and recently, but I will. But it's kind of fun to see if things live. It's also bad to find things die. But that's how we learn. So thank you for your time this morning. I always appreciate coming here. Thank you again. I like the talk. Great talk. Thanks.
That was a great talk. I love that, John. Thank you so much. Very quickly, John, before you walk away, you know it and you want it because you almost have a full tree now. Dr. John Ball, we are always enjoy everything you do when you come, and we thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Here's our appreciation.
Going home, you know,
Thank you so